because everyone has a picture that they normally give out to these things. They're normally from about 6 or 7 years ago, and everyone in the studio is taking the piss, going, Andy, you're so much better looking when you 7 years ago. And I said, okay, well, I'm not going to send, I don't want a new picture. I'll just send one from a really long time ago instead. Okay, oh, good, you can see. Okay, so, you can't see this. The typography is tiny. This wouldn't win any award, would it? So I just want to tell you where I'm from, because when I was asked to do this, they said, oh, can you speak about how you started and where you're from? So there'll be quite a few young designers in the audience that might kind of inspire them. So this is where I'm from, which is kind of the middle of Great Britain, between Manchester and Liverpool. And this is my mum and dad. I don't know what year that was, in the 1950s. And this is me and my sister, doing a bit of a family slideshow now. And this is me in that picture. 1969. Okay. I just wanted to talk about what influenced me. My dad was an architect in Warrington, so he sadly passed away a year and a half ago, but I found all these amazing books when he died, which I didn't know he had, like these books here by Corbusier, were brilliant book covers. And books on typography, which I never knew he had either, which was quite surprising. But my mum was a teacher, so she taught children of like 4 or 5-year-olds. And I was surrounded by all this kind of graphics that she made herself. So these are things that she would make to teach kids with. And she also had these amazing books that actually in a thing called ITA, which is a phonetic language to teach children in, which kind of makes no sense if you're English trying to read that. The word one spelt W-U-N. So for me, I was surrounded by these things that I really they realized that they influenced me as a growing up. So then I ended up going to St. Martin's School of Art in London, aged 19, 20. So that's me with hair back in about, God knows, 83. Oh God. Anyway, but I've always kept sketchbooks, and these are some of the sketchbooks I still had from college. So literally I'm just sticking things in. They're not really they're scrapbooks really, of things that I kind of found. It's always bits of typography that I found in the street or on the floor. And this is a machine we could use to set type in those days. This is obviously pre-computer, but I was messing around because they only had the font Helvetica. That was it. So I just started doing these things that said not Helvetica. And then this is the first poster done at St. Martin's on a computer, because they asked me to do a poster. And it was the first Apple Mac. So I kind of did these printouts and blew them up sort of huge of this letter A. But the one book that inspired me at college was this book by Herbert Spencer called Pioneers of Modern Typography, and it really made me want to be a typographer, because I thought typography was a really dull thing when I originally got to college, but this book really made me think, oh, actually typography can be something really interesting and expressive. So loads of amazing, if you can get a copy of that book, it's still in print, I think. Then I went to the Royal College of Art after that, and this is a bit of I tried to rebrand the college. It didn't get accepted. But I did loads of stuff with fellow students, and we did a magazine called Yak, and this was the poster for the magazine. But again, this is pre kind of computer, so it's all done letterpress and silk screen. So everything was designed on a drawing board. And it came in like this tracing paper wrap, these individual pages, which I did with 2 friends, colleagues, one of which I went on to form Why Not Associates with. So we were basically just experimenting with typography at college. We didn't really know what we were doing. We're just messing about, really, having a bit of a laugh. And to be honest with you, that's still what we do. We just get paid for it. That's the kind of difference. So in 1987, we set up Why Not Associates, straight from leaving college, kind of by accident. We didn't really mean to. Somebody offered us a job, and we did it together, and it kind of... But literally, we left with 3 drawing boards. That's all we had from college. But our first studio was in Soho, so right in the middle of London. And it was opposite this bed show. These girls used to hang outside trying to tempt men inside. And it actually said on our business card, 15 Archer Street in brackets opposite the bed show. And it was next to a casino as well. So it was a brilliant place to be set up a studio. You can see it inside. One of the first things we did was a book about typography called Typography Now, which came out in 1991. But that book that I showed before, the Pioneers of Modern Typography, is really influential to me. This was really influential to a generation of designers who are a bit younger than me. Because typography wasn't seen as a cool thing at that moment, really. And this kind of changed that in a way. Because it was basically a summary of interesting type that was going on at the time. This is ourselves, but this is Ed Feller as well. I'm trying to do 31 years in 20 minutes here, so to bear with me, I'm going through things quickly. So clients we've had over the years, like the Royal Academy of Arts in London, where we do kind of more traditional posters like this, Joseph Beuys. And this was for the Sensation show, which is kind of interesting because we were told we didn't have to show an actual object from the show. We didn't have to show a Damien Hirst or a Rachel Whitehead. They wanted an icon for the show. So we had this idea that literally took 5 minutes of thinking about sensations and the kind of sensations you can have and the painful sensation you can have and what's the worst painful thing could happen to you. And then we're thinking, well, we probably can't print that. So we're thinking about a tongue, like somebody said, oh, burning your tongue's a really powerful sensation thing. And then suddenly you could see a tongue and an iron and literally it was one of those things we did in about 10 minutes, but it was sort of powerful poster, I think, for the time. And really handily, the A in sensation is right in the middle of the word. To sit in the middle of that iron. It's my iron still, but it's not my tongue. And the follow-up show to that was Apocalypse, where this is an interesting idea where we took the word apocalypse and took the counters out of the font. And we had it over images of fire and brimstone and what you'd expect apocalypse to be. But as soon as we put it over something beautiful, it becomes a much more powerful piece of communication, I think. But we also do loads of film work. So this is a trailer for Channel 4. So Channel 4 is one of the TV stations in Britain. And they would come to us and we got 3 days to do a trailer from scratch, which is great because they can't really say no to anything. So this is the trailer, hopefully it works.
The violence has continued for weeks. Hundreds of children have died. A whole population has been terrified. And no Western journalists have been allowed to see it as it happened. So, when you watched the news, what were you not being shown?
Featuring footage that hasn't aired on mainstream television, Jon Snow presents a special dispatches on the recent offensive and examines the impact of Israel's decision to ban foreign journalists from the war zone. Unseen Gaza, tonight at 11:05 on 4.
Really simple idea, just trying to execute it as well as we can. But obviously, we do all the animation in-house because After Effects was invented and suddenly we could do it ourselves. We work a lot with this guy, Gordon Young, who's an artist. And so he was at the Royal College 10 years before us, and we met in the early 90s and I've done a lot of projects with him. So this was the idea, he came with this idea, said, I want to do some typographic trees in a library. So basically, then we got to try and design a set of 14 trees, 2 meters high. So basically, he then went and found all these trees, and the text is sandblasted onto each tree. So you get this lovely type because the trees are damp and they start to crack. And they're still cracking and still changing within the library. But each tree is from a different book, and they were voted for by community members of the library. So there's the first line from Harry Potter, there's Shakespeare, there's Dracula, there's various things. So this is them sat within the library. So they're scattered throughout the building, but they just kind of go floor to ceiling. I'm just trying to show you the breadth of kind of things that we do. So this is a branding project for a place called De Single. So De Single is an arts centre in Belgium, in Antwerp. So they do theatre, dance, music and architecture, kind of weird combination with a school of architecture in there. And they asked us to rebrand them. And when I went for the meeting, the original logo from the 1970s was still on the building, but they weren't using it. So I said I'd like to use the old logo. So we took the old logo, but we just started to be more playful with it, because there's a very kind of experimental place, De Single. Lots of very different artists, you know, do very different things there. So we tried to give the branding a bit of life, really. But the other weird thing of the brief was they said, can you, because it's 3 separate buildings that date from various decades, can you link the building architecture into the branding? Which is a really strange request. So we started taking shapes out of the building. And they've got these amazing 1960s windows that look like pebble shapes. And suddenly we ended up with this set of shapes. It's like, what are we now going to do with these shapes? So we started to use them as part of the brand on the back of the stationery and things. Other graphic elements. But actually the most important thing was that they'd be given an image for a show, and you've got no choice, you have to use that image. But by using the shape as a crop, it suddenly makes the poster much more powerful, because you start to get these strange, the text doesn't feel as separate from the image as it might do if it was a straight line. Sometimes it's much more subtle, depending on the show. But the text is always changing colour, and it can be any colour. And sometimes the shapes become a bit more of a random, freakish element. But the typography is an incredibly strict set of rules we set up for everything. So, because you've got all this madness with the shapes, you need that kind of architectural strength of the type really running throughout. So the comedy carpet, okay, so the artist Gordon Young got commissioned to do a piece of public art in Blackpool, which is on the northwest coast of England. And the reason why it was being, it needed all this work doing, the seafront was being washed away by the sea, so they needed to spend a lot of money rebuilding the seafront. So Blackpool exists because it was the first world tourist destination. So the working classes, as soon as the train was invented, would go from the factories in the north of England to Blackpool. And with that came comedians to entertain them. So it became the centre of kind of comedy in Britain. Now, along with that were these posters, obviously designed at the time using letterpress. So this became the inspiration for what became the comedy carpet. So Gordon's idea was, I want to build a carpet of comedy in Blackpool on the seafront, the history of British comedy. So then we decided to do all the research ourselves, which was a slightly insane thing to do, because this thing's the size of a football pitch. So it was months of reading books about British comedy and listening to old radio shows and watching videos. And this is a map we kind of made of trying to figure out the names of all British comedians and whether they had a relationship to Blackpool. Did they play in films? Were they on TV? Were they just stand-up? So there's an enormous amount of research going on. And then we started to design it. So this is one of the really old bits of it, where we're trying to use trying to find digital fonts of old fonts, as it were. Sometimes the fonts we used were fonts you'd never ever think you'd ever use in your life. You know, that word guts there. But we're chucking at absolutely everything, and because it's comedy, you can get away with it. So I would be designing it, and Gordon would be coming in and drawing all over and telling me we can't do it like that, or we do it like this. You can't make it; it's too expensive, or have the. And then eventually we finished it. So it gives you an idea of the scale there. So some of the text is literally 30 mil, and some of it is 1.5 meters. So how do you make a comedy carpet? So basically, he hired a factory in Hull and set up his own comedy carpet company. And it's water-cut granite, so it's a millimetre jet of water can cut through steel as thick as you want, but cuts through granite really quite quickly. So you're left with these. This is actually concrete, so we would cast concrete slabs and then cut it out with water jet. But what you're left with, this is the waste. So you're left this beautiful waste because the computer grabs the designs and rearranges them to save granite. So you're left with these completely random things. Then some poor souls then have to find all the bits of type and start laying it out to check it's there. Bits were then taken and the print was made backwards and stuck in the bottom of a steel tray, and every letter was then glued in place. So you had these big steel trays with the lettering glued down, and then concrete was poured into the tray. And the health and safety man wasn't there that day. And so eventually you're left with this concrete slab, that each slab weighs 4 tons. So then the slab's turned over and peel the print off, and then it's polished. And suddenly you're left with these massive slabs. They were then taken to Blackpool and installed on the seafront. And that's the view. It's right outside Blackpool Tower. So Blackpool has the Britain's equivalent of the Eiffel Tower, except it's not as big. And this is the view looking down from the tower onto the carpet. So that's it on the opening day. I'm not going to translate that one. Okay, there's some more film work. So this is for the Telegraph newspaper. That's it. Sorry, was that too quick? You have more time. No. I realized when